Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Daily Devotional. Our Daily Devotional is coming from Matthew chapter 10, starting in verse 26 today. Going to be a short devotional today. Update on us, we're all doing fine so far. In theory, our quarantine should be up on Monday. Williams will be up on Tuesday. So Lord willing, for our brethren at Wichita Falls congregation, we should be able to be back and see everybody on Wednesday night, Lord willing, assuming nobody else tests positive. All right, so Matthew chapter 10, verse 26, Jesus is speaking to his apostles, and he is encouraging them. He's telling them to go and to teach and to preach and to talk to the lost sheep of Israel specifically. And then he tells them that they're going to be persecuted. They're going to face trials. And starting in verse 26, he says, "Therefore do not fear them. For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light. What you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." So starting off with what Jesus says here in verse 26, he says, "Do not fear them." And this is, again, on the heels of Jesus saying, you're going to face persecution for preaching the gospel, for teaching the truth. But then he says, there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. And this can be applied in a lot of ways, but specifically more along the lines of the understanding that don't fear what man is going to do. God's going to take care of you. And God is going to see all things that happen. There is not going to be a single thing that isn't going to be revealed one day. There isn't a single thing that, despite the attempt to hide it, won't be known. That's both on the end of those doing the persecuting. They will answer for their deeds, but also for the apostles. And this is why he says in verse 27, "Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light. What you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops." There's something to be said here also about the application of everything that Jesus told them to preach, they taught. Everything that the people needed to hear, everything that disciples needed to know. Paul refers to preaching the whole counsel of God to the Ephesian elders at Miletus in Acts chapter 20. The whole counsel of God describes the fact that everything that God has commanded, everything that God has given with regard to his will, his mind on salvation, how the church is to be established, how it's to worship and so forth, all of that is to be taught, is to be revealed. And so, both from the perspective of those doing the persecuting, God sees everything, and one day it's all going to be revealed, but also with regard to what needs to be taught regarding the truth. There is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. Which is to say, the whole truth is going to be revealed. The whole truth is going to be given. Nothing's going to be held back. And there's kind of certainly a specific application that goes against the idea of Gnosticism, especially in John's time, in the late 90s AD, when he writes 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. The understanding or the thought process that some people had secret knowledge. The Gospel of Judas, for instance, is a famously classic Gnostic letter, not written by Judas, and it's not the gospel, it's not truth, but it's being written from the perspective of Judas as if he has secret information. He has secret knowledge to reveal. Jesus says there's not going to be any such thing. Everything that needs to be revealed will be revealed. Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light. What you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops. And then in verse 28, he then kind of buckles that with verse 26 about do not fear them. Do not fear those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. The worst that man can do is beat you and kill you. There is a far worse fate, and that is reserved for those who don't follow God's will. This is both, it is a warning, but it's also meant to be an encouragement that man can only do so much. I mean, the absolute worst man can do is torture you and kill you. There are worse things. And that's why Jesus says, rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. And of course, by destroy, Jesus doesn't mean to cease to exist. We know that hell, according to the New Testament, it's a place of torment. Revelation refers to the smoke of their torment arising forever. So it's not that people are going to be destroyed, but it's a sense of ruin. It's a sense of perdition. And then he goes on to say in verse 29, are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? And not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore. You are of more value than many sparrows. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Notice the encouragement from Jesus, this contrast between what man can do versus what God can do. Not just from a negative or a condemnation or judgment or punishment perspective, but also from a strength perspective. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? Okay, look how cheap they are, is the basic concept that Jesus, aren't 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? Look how cheap sparrows are. But yet not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. Something as minuscule and as seemingly cheap or low value as a sparrow. And yet God is fully aware of every sparrow in the entire world that falls to the ground. Not one of them falls to the ground if it's not God's will. Then in verse 30, he then relays the attention that God gives his creation. The very hairs of your head are all numbered. This is how much attention God pays to you. Do not fear, therefore, verse 31, you are of more value than many sparrows. And of course, we can talk about the differentiation of humans who have souls versus animals who don't have souls. But the concept here, obviously, all things are God's creation. But if God pays attention even to the birds of the air, even to the sparrows, God pays attention to how many hairs are on your head. It shows how much, not only attention to detail that God has to each person, that the master of creation would pay this close of attention to me and to you. But this is how much value you have to him. This is how much he loves you, how much he cares about you. And so, thus, when Jesus says, therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. Despite the threat of persecution, despite the threat of ridicule, despite what may result or may come as a result of confessing Jesus before men, that's fine. Whatever may come, that's fine. Because what will Jesus do? I will confess him before my Father is in heaven. Again, that contrast of, yeah, here's what man can do, but here's what God can do. Not just in the sense, again, of judgment or condemnation, but in the sense of exaltation, of lifting us up, of Jesus confessing our name before his Father. And that sense of salvation, that sense of glory that is associated there. But then, of course, comes verse 33, the other side of that. Whoever denies me before men, because you're afraid of men, because you're afraid of them ridiculing you, you're afraid of them punishing you or torturing you or killing you, there are worse things. I will deny him before my Father who is in heaven, or him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. That is the worst thing that could happen, is that judgment. Jesus, instead of saying, welcome in, good and faithful servant, instead he says, depart from me, I never knew you. And so that's kind of the differentiation there. So it's a very important scripture, not only for the apostles, but it's also very important for us. Especially, I mean, again, our society is really no different than any other generation or any other society that's ever been, in that people of faith have always and will always be they will always stand out. And because they stand out, because they preach the truth not only in word but in example as well, people who don't want to know the truth, people don't want to hear the truth, they are not going to appreciate people who seek to do what's right. And so every generation of faithful people have faced a society, depending, again, it may be of different varying degrees depending on what country you live in or what region you're in and so forth. But every generation has faced trials and tribulations attached to their faith, attached to their willingness to stand for the truth. This, what Jesus says here, is meant to be both an encouragement and a warning. Okay, certainly you know what God can do and what he says he will do if you don't follow his will. Okay, there's hellfire, there's condemnation waiting. Thus, rather fear him, not just respect, not just having reverence. A lot of people, especially in our religious society, people kind of correlate respect and reverence to being fear. Oh, it doesn't really mean be afraid of God. It just means to have respect and reverence. And then they'll go to 1 John and, perfect love casts out fear. That's kind of taken out of context. It doesn't mean that we're not to fear God. Verse 28, rather fear him. That term is phobos. That is true fear. And it's not that I'm that I'm serving God only because I'm afraid. It's not just that. Jesus doesn't just offer fear as motivation, but he reminds us of why we need to stay on the straight and narrow. And a lot of times, I've mentioned this before, the analogy of a racetrack, and how that you have that finish line, that trophy at the end of the finish line as your motivation. But as you're going down that racetrack, while you're going through that course, there are walls on either side. Okay, and so despite the fact that you're racing towards a goal of this trophy or this finish line to finish first, these walls keep you on the track. They remind you of your boundaries, of the restrictions. You have to drive the course. You have to follow the path that you're supposed to follow according to what the rules are. And the fear of hitting one of those walls keeps you on track. And to me, the same analogy fits as a Christian. It's not that God doesn't want us to be motivated by love or by faith. Obviously, the just shall not live by fear, the just shall live by faith. But fear of knowing what God has said is going to happen to the unrighteous and the wicked and those who don't obey him, it keeps us focused. It keeps us reminded about what restrictions exist, and there are. It's not wrong to say that. There's a standard of right and wrong that God has established for people, for all people. And as people of faith, we are to understand what those restrictions are, what those things are that God has said are right, that we should do, things that are wrong that we shouldn't do, or say or think. And so certainly fear is a component in not wanting to go to hell, but also that exaltation, that glory, that trophy, that crown that waits for us at the end, that being confessed before the Father, that being exalted and recognized as being a faithful servant of the Lord, that provides motivation. That provides, just as Jesus, when he wrote to the 7 churches of Asia, to he who overcomes. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. There's your motivation. There's your crown. This is what I'm looking forward to. But he also issues warnings to those churches who weren't doing what was right, to those brethren there. If you don't change, here's what's going to happen. And so there's both. You have both fear as a motivator, but you also have the reward as a motivator. And when Jesus offers this to his apostles, again, this is all in the context of his apostles. He says, verse 5 of chapter 10, these 12 Jesus sent out and commanded them, saying. So he's specifically talking to them. And of course, these elements are certainly applicable to us as well. That God cares about you. He's going to see everything that happens. There's not a single thing that's going to happen in secret that God doesn't see. You speak the truth anyway. You speak everything that you're told to speak. You share the whole counsel of God. God's going to watch over you. He cares about you. He loves you. And He wants you to be successful. He wants us to be successful. He wants us to get to heaven. He's not stacking the deck against us. He has equipped us with His Word. First of all, He's given us brethren. He's given us every means for us to know His will and do what's right. And the question for us is whether or not we're going to do it. That's the daily devotional for you today. I hope this is something I was thinking about, something I kind of was just thinking about when I was reading through Matthew, and just kind of stuck with me. All right, so our next daily devotional, Lord willing, will be Monday at 6:30. Hope to see you all then. Y'all have a great weekend and take care.